Thanks for joining us today for the Content Migration and Application Decommissioning Strategies for Mergers and Acquisitions. Part of a webinar series we're beginning for, it'll start in Q2, so in webinar series for 2016, our first one. Just a little housekeeping before we begin. Your GoToWebinar is actually put in listen-only mode, so you are muted. At the end of the session, you can direct all questions through the chat directly to the organizer, and we will answer the questions accordingly. Please note that this session is being recorded. Our agenda today will give you a short introduction of FME. We'll talk about the challenges of mergers and acquisitions. We'll touch on EMC InfoArchive, FME Migration Center, and AdLib's classification. Our presenter today is Frank Dentrone. He's the president of FME US. So Frank, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Larissa, for giving the introduction. So let me do a little background, a little of FME, sort of who we are for those who may not be as familiar with FME. So FME, our main focus or facts, I would say, based on our slide here, is that we're using, or having a clever use of information management, predominantly around life science and industrial manufacturing and more. I mean, so we do work in other industries, but those are typically areas where we're doing more technology consulting and not directly in the business consulting, whereas in life science and manufacturing, we do have a level of expertise providing that business sort of consultation. The next thing we're, some technology implementation, so ECM, Enterprise Content Management, BI for business intelligence, and custom software development. So that's the area that we operate in. And we do consulting, concept development. We also provide maintenance. And we also have our migration product, which we're going to talk about today a little bit, Migration Center. So founded in '95, actually had relationship with EMC, or Documentum, and now EMC since '96. So a global company, 180 employees. We have offices throughout Germany. Braunschweig is our headquarters. That's the picture of our headquarters, but we do have offices in Munich, Frankfurt, and Cologne. And our subsidiaries, which is in the U.S., this is Larissa and I, are heading up our U.S. practice, but we also have our colleagues in Romania that support us on projects and product support, et cetera. So the last thing I want to mention is sort of our theme within FME that we take serious, and we're the company that you love to work with. What that means is really the relationship and trust. So let's dive into the real context of our webinar today. So M&A, so challenges of mergers and acquisitions. So I put together a few high-level bullets that sort of characterizes, at least at a high level, things to be aware of if you're not, or things to consider. So from the challenges from an M&A point of view, does require a high level or a level of understanding that surrounds the scope of the M&A activity, and in the context of this webinar, pertinent to the business and technology integration. So this is a crucial piece, at least at the very high, broad level. The next thing to consider is getting IT involved, and they by nature will be involved, but getting them more engaged in the integration process early on is crucial to success. In addition, IT responsibilities, would be more in the due diligence regarding, the applications, or many applications, I would say, in sort of the global enterprises around the portfolio, infrastructure integration, and also looking at are there any IT constraints, for example, networking or storage or connecting networks together. These are things that are very important as a foundation. In addition to that, and more importantly to the sort of the main theme of this webinar, is the IT, the application portfolio or rationalization, which in our minds would include application decommissioning as well. And we're going to touch on that today. And lastly, as again the theme of our webinar for FME and the tooling and technologies and skill set that we're bringing for this webinar is around semi-unstructured and I'll explain that in a moment, and the unstructured. So ECM systems, things like Documentum or SharePoint, those types of systems that are in play, and also the unstructured data silos, that would be more network shares, FTP, or the content sitting in a unstructured or without any sort of metadata or identity from a metadata perspective. And what that would mean is, from what we're going to talk about in this webinar is around what does that mean for data classification and in many cases data archiving. So to touch on to the high level the issue, I briefly mentioned a little bit already, but let's highlight a few additional things. So each company, when you're looking at two entities coming together, one buying the other or joint venture, however you want to characterize that, in each organization, there is, especially in the enterprise, global enterprise, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, or Fortune 1000 and beyond, a lot of data, high volume of information, content and metadata, a lot of information that's being generated. This makes the management of that semi-unstructured, the more of those ECM repository systems, and unstructured, those network shares and FTP sites, things like that, very imperative to understand what those repositories or data silos look like. And also the information will and is likely to be in a variety of locations, different IT locations and solutions, different applications. In many cases, there's no ECM or enterprise content management strategy, and the data is sitting in a varying antiquated technologies, technologies that may not be on support or going towards end of life. These are the things to consider. We see as part of the issue when you're looking at M&A activity between two entities, two organizations. Okay, from a reality, what does that mean in a reality? So we have seen and involved in with customers where there's terabytes of data or legacy data in a set of diverse out-of-date systems. May not be that old, but they might be coming end of life or already be end of life, or they're not a strategic direction within your organization. So what that means is cost. So cost in millions annually to maintain. Finding anything is, searching, being able to identify the information that's important for you to share from a business process perspective may not always be available or it may not be successful. So therefore, increasing your legal exposure. Also, records management policies may not have been or may not be implemented at an enterprise level or even at a business unit or functional level. So having a records management program, if you will, is important. In many cases, we're not seeing that level of investment in some of the organizations that we're engaging with. Regulatory compliance. All of what I've said really looks at what's your regulatory compliance risk. And lastly, your knowledge management would remain elusive. So what is the vision? So now that we have a little bit of substance or background, so what does the vision look like? So creating a more effective information governance process or methodology or strategy is crucial. What does that mean? What that means is looking for technology platform standardization, trying to consolidate or establish a roadmap or technology platform roadmap for standardized systems, looking at your different data silos, identifying those silos of information and look towards a level of consolidation for a variety of reasons in terms of cost and overhead and maintenance, establishing a roadmap for platform consolidation. Look towards adopting a records management initiative for an optimized compliance practice or practices, and really establishing a unified, all of the things mentioned, there's data that's active, there's data that's inactive, there's data that you need for compliance reasons or for legal reasons, which really sets the stage for the need to have a unified archive strategy. And having a factory model, repeatable process from an archiving perspective is very important. So we see that becoming way more apparent in the engagements that we're in, and having that repeatable standardized factory process to get to a unified archive implementation. And again, lastly, think enterprise. now I'm going to lead us a little bit, highlight, and again, we're going to have some additional follow-up webinars, but I wanted to touch on what does that mean for archive. And in the context of our message, it's really around EMC's InfoArchive product or platform. So as mentioned, unifying, have a unified archive, the no silos, I kind of highlight that out. Having a scalable architecture, having a low cost, total cost of ownership is crucial. What is the ROI? Having the ability to access the information in a flexible way, but also have a system that's based on standards. For example, the XML or the OASIS standard. So this encompasses the next generation archiving. Some quick facts about legacy applications. When you're looking at archive, you're looking at data, you're looking at applications. Applications are driving data. And here's just some quick facts about what are those, what does it mean, or what are these legacy applications? What's the context of that? 50% of enterprise applications are legacy. And what that means is you have an IT budget allocation of 70% for those existing systems and 30% for new projects. So sort of an imbalance in terms of innovation. And then two out of the three, CIOs are saying that their organizations do not have a single view of legacy system data for compliance reporting. So these are quick facts to consider and think about and reflect that within your organization. So application data archiving drivers, burdening of, a burden by OpEx spend on apps and read-only state, difficulty managing compliance and requirements on large, complex application portfolio, need to consolidate view of legacy data, and we're kind of touching on that a bit in the context of this webinar. Also, exist in a heavily regulated industry. Experience, they're undergoing or expecting M&A, and this, again, this is right in the sweet spot of our webinar. And the need to reduce complexity and spend across your application portfolio. So here are I would say, the two of the three main themes. Not to say that the others are not important, but for the context of our message here in this webinar, these are the three main areas that we're touching on. But again, all of these things need to be considered as well. So legacy application archiving and retirement. So what are the benefits? So reducing your current costs, so looking at software license costs, infrastructure, storage, backup, and utility costs. So it's a variety of things when you look at infrastructure, current infrastructure costs, IT and our HR costs as well. So trying to look at how can you reduce your costs holistically, avoiding future costs, so software and hardware support costs, critical to see where you can gain those savings in current and future. Third item would be enhanced data governance, having independent data preservation, so archiving, retain and manage data against retention policy, having a records management strategy or file plan in place, and then having simplified discovery approach. So when you do have to do some level of discovery, you have all the things in place to be able to perform that level of discovery that's needed based on your industry requirements or your obligations within your industry. And simplified data management and IT infrastructure. So having a single repository for legacy data, that unified archive, and a modern, flexible platform. So these are benefits when you're looking at archiving or legacy application archiving and retirement. Here are some solution objectives. Quick and easy search, so providing an interface, a web-based interface for cross-application data search on those retired applications. So that application data, having that cross-application data search is important. Maintain chain of custody, so ensuring data integrity with unbroken chain of custody from data extraction to future usage. So this is current data sitting in applications now. That same level of that chain of custody needs to be preserved when you bring that into your unified archive. Support data and unstructured content, so managing complete solution with both legacy structured data and related unstructured data. So structured being a metadata, hierarchy, XML data, etc., and that unstructured content. Very important to be able to handle those two use cases when you're looking at a unified archive strategy or model. And definitely, as mentioned earlier, a standards-based approach using XML and industry standards, future-proof. Format for extraction, extract the data, for example, PDFA for content, PDFA format for archiving or long-term preservation. And keeping costs low, of course, is important or an objective. Leveraging your existing infrastructure and technology investments to retire suitable legacy applications. Here I just want to kind of walk you through a flow. So you have your business applications designed or designated for retirement. So there's an extract structured and unstructured data. And I have a little icon here that really depicts FME, our Migration Center tool set. Transform to XML. So this is dependency where this would take place prior to being ingested into the archive, unified archive, which would be an XML archive database repository. Having user interface, third-party, both third-party and EMC mechanisms. Oops, let me skip back, where you can have a web-based data access for search and reporting against that unified archive data set. And here are some quick InfoArchive features for those who may not have, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing of it, so I just want to give you some quick summary of features. So providing a quick and easy search, again, web-based application interface for searching data that was from those decommissioned applications and cross-application searching. Support ease of adoption, so custom UIs to emulate key search. So there's a framework in place where you can adapt those user interface, that searching mechanism, to the customer's needs or their requirements for data search and consumption. Maintaining that chain of custody, I mentioned that, not to ensure data is not tampered with, so it's preserved from source to archive. Support data and content, so both structured and unstructured data, so metadata, table data or database information, and that unstructured data, documents, images, reports, is very important, having both of those use cases supported. Fundamentally on standards, a standards-based platform, XML, been around a while, pretty well adopted in the market or in the industry. Support and governance requirements, supporting your ILM policies such as database retention, legal hold, role-based access, auditing, so having a records management, if you will, strategy or tooling capability. So InfoArchive supports these things. And having and providing lower costs, so lowering your costs, leveraging existing infrastructure and technology investments, which I mentioned earlier, and a simple-to-use solution from EMC to retire these, these applications, these legacy applications, in a cost-effective way. So I just want to touch a little bit on Migration Center. Our Migration Center product is EMC certified. So I'll give you a little summary when it pertains to InfoArchive. So here you'll see you have a variety of source systems that have structured and unstructured data. And then what Migration Center is able to do is to ingest or collect that information from source systems and transform and enrich that information and make decisions where we classify data as active and inactive. So you have content or information that is currently in play or in process that would be considered more active content, like SOPs or that type of information, or regulatory, regulated type of content that's continuously being used. And then you have inactive or static content or information that would need to be kept for long-term or for compliance reasons that's not heavily accessed frequently. This would make total sense to go into InfoArchive repositories. So these are sort of the two use cases that we see as our unique selling proposition, where we are able to handle both in one tool set, Migration Center. So this gives you a little picture of how that can work. So again, wherever that data resides, as long as we have access to it, those source repositories, we're able to collect it into Migration Center and make choices. We can say, okay, archive inactive content to InfoArchive, and we're going to migrate active content into your ECM repository or their technology, for example, Decommissioning repository, depending on your technology roadmap. But these are the two use cases that we support with one tool set, one product. Some highlights of Migration Center for those who may not be as familiar with it. So out-of-the-box software solution for